Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation.
In our last episode, we introduced the issue of human trafficking. Today, we'll continue the conversation and focus on the role of the victim advocate. Can you talk about CSEC court?
So CSEC is the commercial sexual exploitation of children or a commercially sexually exploited child. And reset court sort of followed the way that we do Department 90, which was known as CSEC court. And what happens with Department 90 is youths that come through the juvenile justice system are screened, and if they are at risk for being in this lifestyle, they get diverted over to Department 90. And so they are wrapped with services, a whole team, and again, a collaborative approach between the Public Defender's Office, the District Attorney's Office. We have UC Davis Care Center as one of the partners. CPS is part of this, probation. Everybody works together to try to best support this youth in making better choices and either getting out of that lifestyle or staying out of that lifestyle.
So when people hear human trafficking, they often think of sex trafficking. Do we have a labor trafficking problem here in Sacramento? Is it as prevalent? Is there anything going on that front in Sacramento?
Do you guys do labor trafficking cases?
We do. If anybody brings us a labor trafficking case, we are happy to handle it and prosecute it. We generally have not seen any. Usually they are investigated by Department of Justice, and so they are handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office. We do work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and communicate with them a lot on these cases, and recently did a joint sex trafficking case with them where they've got some of the sex traffickers and I have one of the sex traffickers just because of the charges. But with the labor trafficking, they are pretty long and involved investigations, and so usually that is handled by the Department of Justice.
But I'm glad that you brought that up, because when we talk about human trafficking, I do think generally everybody immediately thinks of sex trafficking, when indeed there is labor trafficking and there is sex trafficking. They are both types of human trafficking. And I do think there probably is a problem with it here in Sacramento. I think just as sex trafficking is happening right in front of us and we don't necessarily know what we're looking at, but I tell you, once you see what's happening, you can't unsee it. You see it all around. And I think the same goes for labor trafficking, that once you kind of figure out what might be happening or have suspicions, you can't unsee it.
Well, I will also share that if you Google the Polaris project, they have great information about labor trafficking and areas where you find labor trafficking. And once you look at that list, you realize it's everywhere. They talk about nail shops, in agriculture, in retail, in restaurants. We know that's really big in the restaurant industry. So that's a resource you can look at.
And domestic servitude.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So again, targeting some of the same vulnerabilities in victims of labor trafficking?
Well, a lot of times with labor trafficking, they're bringing over foreign nationals to work. And the control over those victims is that the person exploiting them will either, one, control their documents so they can't, leave or move, and they'll make a threat of deportation if they don't follow the rules. So they're kind of stuck because, one, who are they going to go to? The authorities and report that they're being labor trafficked, or and then a lot of times too, there's arrangements made overseas, and sometimes there's threat of family members being hurt if they don't do it. There's all kinds of
So it's a business model for some countries.
Right. It's kind of a bait and switch too,
Mm-hmm.
that they are told that you'll go over, you'll make X amount of money, these are going to be your responsibilities, and there's a lot of intracultural recruitment. So they're more inclined to trust whoever is recruiting them and bringing them over because they'll share the same culture, language, And when they're brought over, it ends up being a completely different story.
Does that include children? Because in the U.S., people can tell if a child is working a job that, does that include children that get labor trafficked, or is that more adults?
I think it's more adults.
Because we would identify a child who looks like they should not be working at a restaurant.
Right.
Correct.
And the other part of that too is the moving around. You're talking about control, so that you can't get comfortable and figure out your surroundings and figure out, well, wait a minute, maybe I can tell law enforcement, maybe I can tell the neighbor. It is, you move from one city to another.
And where we see it, but it's kind of a crossover between sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and cases that we work with law enforcement on all the time are the massage parlor cases.
And you'll see the movement there too, where they might start out at one business location and then they'll rotate them around across different regions.
Right, and if one county, is really working on closing down all the massage parlors, you will then see those same women and the same massage parlors with a little bit of a different name pop up over in Citrus Heights or over in Rancho Cordova or somewhere nearby.
Because I think mostly, a lot of the kids that are vulnerable to being recruited in this lifestyle either have really low self-esteem or don't have good support systems at home or otherwise. And so I think
But don't they just have to pay attention just because the household I grew up in, the minute that I'm not in class, my parents knew exactly what I was doing all the time.
But things have changed. They really have. I mean,
they're more kids are more independent.
Parents, they're very independent. All of these parents are working 8 to 5 or even longer hours. They're commuting. The traffic is so bad. So these kids are home alone. And they've got social media, which we didn't have when we were growing up.
And
so
Ubers,
they've got and Ubers. And so they've got ways to invite people into their home without actually having them in their home and communicate with them. So it's a very different ballgame. And I mean, the best way that when Bea and I always discuss it, and Annette and Jason, and when we teach with John, is just talk to your kids, be involved in what they're doing, be on top of their social media, know who their friends are, know when there's a new friend who comes in and who is that friend introducing you to. You're going to party, well, who are those parents? Which gets harder as they get older, but having a good relationship with them just so they know you're trying to keep them safe and in the know of what's happening.
And I know my parents, as soon as I had friends that drove before I drove, that becomes a very scary thing because now you've got someone in your group who can drive you somewhere and take you away. So I think that might be.
It is, except for the new laws, right? Except for the new laws that prevent 16-year-olds from having other kids in the car. True. That's helpful.
Yeah.
They can't be on their phones when they're. I mean, could they break those laws? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of a cushion there too. It's to me, it's more about the social media and how the kids are pretty savvy about having an Instagram page, or they don't really use Facebook, but they'll have one page where they're like, here, Mom, here's my page. But really, most of them have a second page that their parents don't know about. Right. And you're really being on top of that if you think that there's an issue.
Instagram.
Yeah. On broader terms, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say, put the Life 360 app on your kid's phone so you know where they are at all times.
Is that a tracker?
Yeah.
In general terms, obviously there's to be concerned about, a lot of information. What is law enforcement, the DA's office, community organizations doing to inform the public, raise awareness, and prevent this from happening?
Well, from the DA's office, I know that we go out to communities and we put on presentations and talk about human trafficking. We talk about the signs, what they can do to prevent it, pay attention, calling law enforcement. We offer the National Human Trafficking Hotline to them. If they see anything, they can call.
Right. We firmly believe in knowledge is power. The more information they have about it, the more that they can recognize it and know when to do something about it and what to do about it. And so we do, with the Speakers Bureau, the three of us spend a lot of time teaching law enforcement, talking to community groups, and even the one that we've done several times is having either high school students or college students call us and ask us questions, because they are then in turn presenting it to their own classes.
Wow.
Which is really, so we'll get on the speakerphone with them and talk to them, and then they'll send emails to us with follow-up questions, and we can give them numbers or, examples of things. But just getting the correct information out there, I think, is incredibly powerful.
The Speakers Bureau that's been mentioned is the DA's Office Speakers Bureau. So people can just go on our website, sacda.org, ask for a speaker on this topic or many other topics.
Right, and just be patient with us with the Speakers Bureau, because it's just the three of us.
I think one of my favorite things that we get to do through the Speakers Bureau is when we get to speak to high schoolers in particular, whether it's through the DA Youth Academy or if we happen to go to, a high school classroom, because I think we end up connecting with some teens that might be vulnerable and might have been on the precipice of getting lured into that world. And so if we can arm them with questions and critical thinking skills about what are they looking at, what is this world really all about, and kind of take the illusion of glamour out of it because they're sold this dream, I think that's one of my favorite things. It's the idea that we can connect with them in that way and show them what the reality truly is, instead of letting somebody come in and dupe them.
And what I really like about those, and we've seen it with the Youth Academy, is that some of the teenagers will say at the beginning, well, they want to be out there. They are and they call them all sorts of names, either a hoe, a slut, or they're easy, or things like that. And by the end, when we ask them, now what do you think? Now that you have this information on what's really going on, they realize, oh no, these are actually victims.
They're mortified.
They are mortified with the terms they used at the beginning. And we tell them, no judgment, we're here to talk about this. So just, give us your opinions, give us your thoughts on it. And by the end, really, and I have one girl in particular, just at the beginning, she said all this at the end. She's like, I can't believe I thought all that before. And I said, that's okay. That's why we're here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're here, to explain to you what's really going in the background. Nobody wants to be out there selling their body. Even if they say they want to.
I'll never believe that people truly want to do that. I'll never believe that.
Exactly. They might have to. But it's not anything, as Bea said, that when they were growing up, they said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah. Can someone talk about the Sacramento Together Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition?
Sacramento Together is a coalition of law enforcement agencies, the district attorney's office, and community organizations coming together in Sacramento County to combat human trafficking. And with the community partners, they are providing resources. When we've had meetings as law enforcement, and we talk about going out on stings, and we are going after the demand. And we're providing resources to the sex sellers. The community organizations have provided gift cards for food and such, and they've also come along with us so they can be an instant resource right there to talk to the women or men or boys about getting out of that life.
It's just a great place for everybody to come together, because everybody does something a little bit different, for everybody to be able to know what everyone else in the room does and how we can help these victims. And so law enforcement is a big part of the coalition, and then all of our nonprofit partners that work with us, huge piece of the puzzle. So when, as Annette was just saying, we are out there, or law enforcement is out there, and they're coming in direct contact with the girls or the women or the boys and the men as the victims, that we can immediately give them resources and not just think, oh, call this organization. Actually have a name. This is who you need to call, this organization, to get you immediate help, whether it's 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because we all know each other now, and we can all work together and to do the best that we can for these victims.
Right.
And from a law enforcement perspective, it's great for me because trafficking doesn't stay within the city boundaries. It crosses over into the county, it crosses over into Citrus Heights, Rancho, whatever it is. So when I get to meet with these the other investigators who deal with these types of cases, we're comparing notes all the time. And if you could build that network of partners,
Your net gets bigger.
It gets bigger and bigger, and it's amazing. I've had people from Orange County ask me about, do you know so-and-so? I just got a call from Honolulu PD today asking me, do I know about so-and-so? So the tentacles reach out far, and if you could build those partnerships, it really helps putting these investigations together.
Absolutely.
Makes cases really successful.
Yes, very successful. I mean, we've got one right now. It's 5 counties, and just getting the cooperation from all of those law enforcement agencies is a lot to do with the different connections that Annette has made and that the detective who was on the case has made. It's incredibly helpful.
And to connect all those together.
And then as far as our community partners here, they're often aware of other similar organizations in other counties. So as these victims move around to different locations, we can still try to connect them with resources wherever they go.
In addition to trying to build prosecutable cases against the traffickers, lately we've been putting focus on the demand side. And what I mean by the demand side is the sex buyers, or what are commonly referred to as Johns. And so we've put quite a lot of effort into enforcing that aspect of the prostitution. And so we've been pretty successful finding these guys, and it's mostly guys. And what we're finding is that we're finding a lot of the more sophisticated types of sex buyers. And, unfortunately, it's prominent members of the community. It's not just your criminal element, although we find those guys too. But the whole point is, and this has been a focus of Sacramento Together and its partners, is in community requests, because it is an issue, especially out on Stockton Boulevard. So we put the focus out there, and in hopes you reduce the demand, that it reduces, the availability to engage in prostitution.
Those John stings, are those out on the streets, stroll? What's the terminology? Online, everything?
You name it. We've had most success with the street right now, because most of the activity is out there. There's still quite a bit online activity. There's websites out there where the women engaging in prostitution can set up ads. It's almost like Craigslist, and then a lot of times they'll meet either some at the sex buyer's location, or they'll come to where the victims are. And so whether that's hotels or in cars or whatever it is. But right now, the big focus is on the street activity, because that's where a lot of the community complaints are coming from.
And you've been using these stings too to connect with some of the women that are out there working, some of them that might be interested in services. So that's one of the things that I, as an advocate, like that you guys have been doing, that you are connecting them with resources, that's an optional conversation they can have.
Right. So when I run these sting operations, I'll bring CASH, Community Against Sexual Harm, out there, and their advocates. And so what we'll do is when we make contact with the sex buyers and the victims, we'll take enforcement action on the sex buyers, and then we will provide the victim, opportunity to the resources, and hopefully give them, the ability to get out for the night, get out for a longer period if they want, or whatever the case may be. But it's all about just trying to help these victims get out of the life.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
We're planting seeds for success, and that's how we have to define that now with the victims, getting them on the path, right, to a safer place.
And knowing that there are setbacks. There are always going to be setbacks here and there. And it's about, again, empowering them to at least know that there are resources out there. I think sometimes we see that they have the most difficulty actually asking for help, because they've been so convinced, maybe since childhood, that nobody's there to actually help them, or that there are strings attached, and realizing that, especially with our community partners, there aren't strings attached.
And there's follow through, because
and there is follow through.
People offer help, but then they don't follow through.
Right.
Well, let's end with, if there's people out there who know of a victim, or they're out and about and they think they see someone who might be a victim, what do they do? Who do they call? What would you suggest?
I would give out the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and that phone number is 1-888-373-7888.
So even if it's a local, they call the national hotline. So what happens when they call the national hotline?
I would say if it's something that's happening in front of them, call 911 and notify the police to get out there. And then that way they can make whatever initial assessment. And a lot of times I try to make myself available to at least either assist or respond if need be. But if, like I said, if something's happening right in front of them, call 911, get the police out there if they can. And then
Absolutely. But if they've just got a tip or they think there's something suspicious, that's when you're going to use the hotline.
Okay.
And that's usually what we get. And then it's interesting because the people who look at those tips start to put them together and do follow up from there. Right.
So it's
it is
one
important.
central reporting so people can sort of piece things together.
It is. We don't have a lot of resources. The law enforcement agencies don't have a lot of resources for it, but it is available. And we do use them, and we've built cases off of them and prosecuted off of them. But again, as Jason said, absolutely. If it's happening in front of you, call 911.
Talk about the victim advocate's role in these human trafficking cases. I would suspect, like in most cases, these particular cases require special experience, sensitivities.
So it's been really interesting over the past 5 years working this caseload. I started out in the domestic violence unit here in Victim Witness, and a lot of that is advocacy that comes once a case is filed and we make contact with a named victim in a case. When I tried that on one of my first human trafficking cases, the victim had some choice words for me and quickly hung up because it goes back to, does she really see herself as a victim? There's a lot of self-blame. She didn't ask for this case to happen. She didn't want to be a named victim, and there was a lot of anger and resentment. And I wasn't entirely prepared for that interaction, but I learned from it. And I had the opportunity when Detective John Saito, now Sergeant Saito, had offered to bring me out on a victim interview, just so I could see what it's kind of like. And we found that that approach worked really, really well to bring an advocate along with law enforcement. And it made it more of just a conversation. And as I built rapport with him as a detective, it just got easier and easier to talk with the victims. It made it easier for the victims to talk with us. We were just regular people. And to know that someone else was in the interview with them that was not law enforcement. That, I make it clear to them, I'm here for your support. If you want to take a break, if you want to put this on hold, if you don't want to talk to us at all, I'm here to make sure that your voice is heard in this process. And we had started to connect really well. And that's a model that we then applied to my work with other detectives, like with Jason. And as Jason said, we'll just talk about other things and we'll work on building rapport. I still do a lot of the same victim advocacy things, such as court support, case updates, helping them apply for victim compensation, especially if they're looking for relocation or counseling, if they're not already connected to these resources. I do all that, but it was those early cases that showed me I had to take a very proactive approach because it wasn't going to work to just say, hi, I'm Bea Lavrov. I'm a victim advocate from the DA's office. I just got a case where you're the named victim, and I just wanted to let you know about our services. That was not going to work.
Because they were resistant,
Absolutely.
reluctant. Right?
Absolutely. Because that would say, oh, I'm a victim and he's the perpetrator, and that means I'm turning on him. And now I'm a snitch.
It's a process then, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
With them. Okay.
And as I have learned from the beginning, I can't just go in and say, hi, I'm Detective Collins, and tell me about your story.
That would be intimidating.
Right. So
Let's never do that.
No. But Bea has been a valuable resource in my process of investigations because there's times these interviews get very heavy and there's a lot of traumatic things that are coming out of these, especially the kids, out of their mouths. And so there's been moments where it's like, you know what, let me step out, or even Bea will ask me, hey, you know what, let's take a time out. And then, which is great because then I could leave being with the victim, they could reset, and then we could kind of, pick up if we need to or stop, whatever the case may be. But it's not something that I would be able to do by myself. It just adds another tool or layer that is helpful in being supportive of these victims.
I would add that what I have learned, because I have to walk a fine line being an investigator in the DA's office, because now the case is going to prosecution and the victim knows that there's a case going, and so I have to balance that, and they still don't want to be seen as a victim. And collaborating with other detectives and investigators, what I find that's most important is that if there's a case that Sacramento Police Department brings forward and it's a case with Jason, then to meet with Jason and the victim, so there's this handoff, or that because B has been in the room, then B can say, okay, now Annette, the investigator from my office, will talk to you. And so through all of this collaboration, we have learned that sort of approach works really well, versus it's just a hard cutoff from Jason and then now it's to me, and then the victim has no idea like what's going on. Why do I keep having to tell the story? And why are all these different folks asking me questions?
It builds a little bit of instant credibility. So if I've got a good rapport with the victim and I could say, hey, here's Annette, good friend of mine. She's going to take good care of you. You know, she's going to help you through the next layer of the process. You know, she's okay. Then that opens the door for Annette and makes it a lot easier for her.
And the anxiety and stress and all those things with going through the process probably really helps with that, so that they're not feeling lost in the system or falling through the cracks type thing, where they're just getting handed off, you know, without any sort of, like you said, kind of a warm handoff.
Yeah,
Right.
we strive for continuity,
Yes.
and we try to minimize the number of new people we have to introduce. In fact, when it comes time to introduce them to Danielle as the DA on the case, she will often wait a little bit and wait until it's the right time, according to the rest of the team, until we feel that, okay, now is a good time to say, hey, this is Danielle, she's the DA, she's handling this case. You know, and again, vouching for the detective or vouching for the investigator or other organizations that I might refer them to, and to say, hey, I trust this organization. I wouldn't refer you to somebody I didn't think could do good work with you. So I think we really try to build on that trust. We really try to keep continuity for them. I had a teenage girl recently that testified that in preparation for coming to court, she said, you're still going to be my advocate when trial starts, right? Because we'd been working together for about 2 years. And so I said, absolutely, I will be there. And I said, remember, you met Annette before. Annette will be there too. And remember, I introduced you to Danielle. She'll be there too. So having that same team goes a long way for having that comfort level
And
when they
getting
have
her-
to show up and do something so difficult.
Getting through that court process,
Yes.
which is probably
Yes.
maybe the most scary part of it, is having to go into court and go through that process.
Yeah, but it's really nice to see afterwards how many of them will say, I'm really proud of myself for doing it. I didn't think I could, but I'm really glad I did it. And seeing them come in scared, but leaving empowered is really heartwarming.
It would be amazing to see that transformation of not wanting to be seen as a victim, and the self-esteem, and turning that around where they understand and they now see the situation that they were in.
It's about building the right support too.
Right.
And again, when I go in with Jason or any other detective for that initial interview, part of the reason is having that team approach. So if you see him, you're seeing me too. He's not going to be the knight in shining armor that becomes the be all end all for this victim that probably has unhealthy relationships associated with men. And then he doesn't become the only person that they can turn to. They now have my contact info, his contact info. We support together. And then we introduce gradually, maybe a provider, and start transferring them over to services to make sure that their needs are being met by others, and they learn to be a little more self-sufficient in their own self-care.
We just yesterday went to court on a victim that we've been working with for almost 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And she's getting to the final stages of her process, and she's finished high school. She's engaged in a anti-trafficking program that she's halfway through. She's living out on her own, and But the times I couldn't make it to the court date, the question was, where's Jason? Or if I was there, where's Bea? And so, it's a total team approach. She had 2 other people there yesterday at court. So, it's about the follow-up on the back end. You can't just go in and get all the information you need, do the case, and then, move on. You got to follow up on the back end as well.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So the trust.
Again, it's coming back to trust.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us for our next episode where we'll start a 2-part series on elder abuse.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.